Hi guys, today we'll delve into the case of a girl who went out for a walk and vanished under mysterious circumstances. The police joined the search and quickly found several eerie clues. But despite this, the case remained unsolved for 3 decades until investigators finally managed to crack it. Yet even after that, the story still has some unanswered questions. Melissa Tremblay was born on March 1, 1977, in Lawrence, Massachusetts. When she was just a month old, her biological parents gave her up for adoption, and she was adopted by Jeanette and Robert Tremblay. Melissa grew up in the nearby town of Salem, New Hampshire. She was a very energetic child who loved fashion, singing, and had a passion for reading from a young age. Melissa had many friends at school and spent a lot of time at the Boys and Girls Club of America. When she was 9, her adoptive parents divorced, and her father hasn't been involved in her life since. Sometime later, her mother started dating another man named Robert, but he didn't live with them. On September 11, 1988, when she was 11, her mother took Melissa to Lawrence, where she was supposed to meet Robert. They often spent time at a local bar, and Jeanette frequently took Melissa along because she had no one to leave her with. Usually, her mom would let Melissa play outside since she got bored sitting with them. Jeanette always told her not to go far, so Melissa spent time on the nearby streets. Because her mom went to this bar quite often, Melissa made friends with other kids in the area and would occasionally play with them. That day, Melissa spent most of her time outside, checking in with her mother now and then. During one of these visits, the bartender made her some popcorn. Melissa said she'd come back for it soon and left, but she never returned to the bar. Around 4 p.m., her mother started to worry since Melissa had been gone for a while. She went outside and checked her car, but Melissa was nowhere to be found. She and Robert began searching for her, going street by street, but they couldn't find Melissa. They searched the area for several hours, and around 9 p.m., Jeanette decided to call the police. Officers immediately joined the search, but they also couldn't find any traces of her. By then, it was already dark. It made their task much more difficult, but the police continued searching for Melissa late into the night. They also considered the possibility that she might have run away, but her mother insisted that Melissa was afraid of the dark and didn't like being alone, so she would never have run off. The next day, Melissa's whereabouts were still unknown, and the search continued. This went on until about 3 p.m., when a railroad worker called the police. He had been conducting a routine inspection of an old rail yard just a few hundred yards from the bar. The yard was quite large, with up to 8 tracks in its widest section, although some of them hadn't been used in a long time. There were a lot of empty boxcars, and between 2 of them, the worker noticed something unusual. When he got closer, he realized it was a human body and immediately called the police. Detectives arrived at the scene and quickly identified the body as Melissa Tremblay. Aside from the fact that she had been reported missing since the previous morning, there was a card with her name from the Boys and Girls Club in a purse found near the body. Melissa's body was lying on tracks that were still in use, and one of her legs had been severed. The detectives believed this likely happened due to a passing train, since the section of track was still active. However, they immediately doubted that this was the cause of death. The lead detective noticed several details that contradicted this theory. Melissa's purse, containing the card with her name, was found almost 20 yards from the body. This seemed strange, as it was unlikely that a train accident could have thrown the purse so far. The detective also noticed a large number of footprints and drops of blood near the purse. This led him to suspect that Melissa might have been attacked there, and only then her body was moved to the tracks. The assailant might have hoped to make it look like she died in a train accident. Another factor pointing to foul play was the location itself. The old rail yard, with its numerous empty boxcars, was a known hangout for homeless individuals and those looking for secluded spots to use illegal substances. So the detectives considered the possibility that some of them might have attacked Melissa. Her body was sent to medical examiners, while the police began searching for clues. Since no useful evidence was found at the scene where Melissa was discovered, investigators focused on finding witnesses to piece together the timeline of events. First, they spoke with an employee of the railroad company. He mentioned that the day before the body was found, he saw a girl fitting Melissa's description near the tracks. He told her to leave immediately because it was unsafe for children to be there, and she left the area. Next, the police found a woman living not far from the bar. She said she had known Melissa for several months because her children had become friends with Melissa, and she often visited their house. On that day, Melissa had come over to invite her children to play, but the woman told her they were grounded and couldn't go out, so Melissa left alone. Investigators soon found another witness who provided the first significant lead. He reported seeing a girl resembling Melissa standing next to a van at an intersection near the rail yard, talking to the driver. The witness described this man as rather large, unkempt, around 30 years old, with dark hair and a large beard. The van was brown, old, and rusty. The police considered that this man might be connected to the murder and started searching for similar vehicles. Meanwhile, the medical examiners finished their report and confirmed that the train was not the cause of death. Melissa's body had numerous bruises and 3 fatal stab wounds. No signs of sexual assault were found, and there were no foreign biological samples on her body or clothing. The experts determined that the stab wounds were inflicted with the left hand, suggesting that the perpetrator was likely left-handed. The case was reclassified as a homicide, and detectives focused on finding the killer. However, they still had only one lead: the description of the van seen near Melissa shortly before she disappeared. The police concentrated on finding similar vehicles in the area, but repeatedly hit dead ends. The challenge was that even if they found the right van, linking its owner to the murder would be nearly impossible without a confession. DNA analysis was not yet in use, and there were no additional pieces of evidence, like Melissa's belongings or fingerprints, likely to be found in the van. The police also kept trying to find new witnesses. They interviewed several hundred residents in the area, but this effort yielded no results. Detectives continued searching for the van and other clues for several months, but the case eventually went cold. Melissa's murder received significant media coverage, and many people began blaming her mother for what happened. They were outraged that Jeanette let her 11-year-old daughter wander the streets alone, especially near such a dangerous place as a rail yard. What infuriated them even more was that while Melissa roamed the streets for hours unattended, her mother was drinking in a bar. Rumors began spreading in the newspapers that Jeanette had developed a drinking problem after her divorce and was struggling with her parental responsibilities. People also started blaming social services for failing Melissa by not intervening in the situation. Amid all these accusations, Jeanette refused to speak with media or answer their questions. When reporters reached out to Child Protective Services, they stated they were aware of the family's complicated situation and had tried to take some measures, but revoking Jeanette's parental rights had never been considered. Since then, there had been no progress in the case. Police repeatedly reviewed it and examined potential suspects, but this yielded no results. In 2000, 12 years after the murder, investigators identified their first potential suspect, Tommy Lynn Sells. He confessed to 22 murders, and investigators in Melissa's case found that many details of his crime closely matched those of her murder. Moreover, Tommy resembled the van driver seen with the girl, and he often spent nights in empty boxcars while traveling across various states. Detectives began investigating his possible involvement in Melissa's murder, but they eventually concluded that he was unlikely to be responsible. They couldn't find any evidence placing Tommy near Lawrence at that time. Instead, they determined he was probably in another state. The case remained cold for several more years, until 2013, when detectives unexpectedly obtained a new lead. They arrested a man from Lawrence for an unrelated case, and during questioning, he suddenly claimed to know some details about Melissa Tremblay's murder. The man said that in 1988, when he was just 13, he used to steal cars for a living. He spent a lot of time on the streets looking for suitable vehicles, and on the day Melissa disappeared, he saw a girl resembling her. She was sitting on the steps of that same bar, and next to her was a man named Mike. The witness knew Mike, but his family had warned him to stay away from that man because of his questionable reputation. The boy walked past them, and about 10 minutes later, on his way back, he saw the girl leaving the bar with Mike. At some point, another man, whom the witness didn't recognize, approached them, and the three of them continued walking together. The police asked the witness why he had remained silent for 25 years. He replied that at the time, he didn't want any unnecessary contact with the police. However, when he learned about Melissa's murder and realized he might have seen her, he asked his brother if he should tell someone, but he advised him to stay quiet. However, the detectives immediately found a serious contradiction in the story. According to the witness, he saw the girl on the bar steps when it was already dark outside, but Melissa was reported missing around 4 p.m. when it was still daylight. Given that all the bar patrons and staff were aware of her disappearance, and her mother had been searching for her for hours, the detectives found it highly unlikely that Melissa could have been right outside the bar without being noticed. The police considered the possibility that the witness had either seen a different girl or his account was inaccurate. Despite this, they investigated Mike for potential involvement, but made no progress. Nevertheless, the witness's story brought renewed attention to the old case, and in 2014, it was reopened. By then, DNA analysis was widely used, and the police hoped that experts could find some new clues by re-examining all the available evidence. They examined Melissa's clothing and other items, but found no foreign DNA. However, there was something else among the evidence: samples taken from under Melissa's nails, collected in case she had scratched her attacker. The experts analyzed these samples and indeed found traces of foreign skin, which were promptly sent to the lab. But there was a new problem. Experts were able to extract a DNA profile of an unknown male, but it was only partial. It wasn't enough to get a match in the database, but the investigators were determined not to give up. Sometime later, they reached out to a company specializing in genetic genealogy. The company analyzed the sample and began searching for potential matches in available databases. This was a challenging task because they had to work with a partial profile, which made it impossible to identify the person with absolute certainty. Nevertheless, through meticulous work, they managed to find a possible distant relative of the sample's owner in the databases. This led them to a specific family with the last name McClendon. Detectives began investigating the members of this family, trying to determine who might have committed the crime. This process took several years due to the primary challenge: the lack of a complete DNA profile to definitively prove the guilt of any family member. Therefore, investigators carefully examined who among them could have been in Lawrence in 1988, matched all the criteria like age, and so on. Eventually, they focused on 2 brothers, one of whom was Marvin McClendon. Marvin lived in Alabama, but investigators discovered that in the late 80s, he lived just 20 minutes away from Lawrence and worked as a carpenter. Digging into Marvin's past, they learned that he frequently visited a church located just a few hundred yards from the bar where Melissa was last seen. Marvin had also worked as a prison guard for about 30 years, but with breaks, one of which occurred in 1988. The intriguing findings didn't stop there. Police found that Marvin owned an old brown van during those years, which he used for work. Despite this, Marvin had no criminal record, aside from numerous traffic fines for not wearing a seatbelt. He had been married twice, but both wives had left him. He had 2 sons from his first marriage, but was not actively involved in their lives. Finally, Marvin was left-handed, unlike all his close male relatives. While detectives were investigating this suspect, Melissa's mother passed away in 2015 at the age of 70. She had struggled with a severe illness for a long time and never found out who killed her daughter. After gathering all the information on Marvin and checking his other relatives, detectives concluded that he was the most likely perpetrator. In 2021, they went to Alabama to question him about that time in the late 80s. Eventually, they brought up the murder of Melissa Tremblay, and Marvin claimed he had nothing to do with it. When told that DNA from one of his close relatives was found on the victim, Marvin suggested that the killer might be his brother. That same year, Marvin voluntarily provided his DNA sample, but experts still couldn't establish a complete match. The partial profile from under Melissa's nails only indicated that Marvin was either closely related to the killer or was the killer himself. However, investigators who had already examined all his close male relatives knew that none of them could have committed the crime, leaving Marvin as the prime suspect. They also understood that without a full DNA match, it would be extremely challenging for the prosecution to secure a conviction. As a result, they spent another year trying to find any additional clues. Detectives also checked Mike, the man whom the 13-year-old boy claimed to have seen with a girl resembling Melissa on the bar steps. After obtaining his DNA sample, experts determined that it didn't match the skin particles found under the victim's nails, ruling him out as a suspect. They visited Marvin several times, asking him various questions, and in April 2022, they finally decided to arrest him. Despite his continued claims of innocence, Marvin allegedly made a suspicious remark during his arrest. He told one of the officers, "At least I got to enjoy 20 years of my pension." Marvin, who was 74 years old at the time, was sent to jail awaiting trial. The judge had to place him under constant protection because other inmates quickly learned about his charges and the fact that he had worked as a prison guard. Without conclusive evidence, the prosecution relied on a process of elimination. DNA from someone in Marvin's family was found under the victim's nails, but none of his close relatives had the opportunity to commit the crime. As for distant relatives, a match with their DNA would be less evident, and experts could easily see the difference. They also pointed out that in 1988, Marvin frequently visited a church on the same street as the bar, owned a similar van, and matched the description given by a witness who saw a girl near his vehicle. The trial began in December 2022. Marvin's lawyer immediately focused on the lack of a complete DNA profile of the perpetrator, claiming that without it, his client's guilt couldn't be confirmed. The defense then called two experts. One was a forensic specialist who testified that, based on crime scene photos, she couldn't confirm that the killer was indeed left-handed. The other was a genetics expert who argued that a partial DNA match with one family doesn't rule out the possibility of it belonging to distant relatives, as any person can have hundreds or thousands of them. Marvin declined to testify in his defense, and by the end of December, the jury began their deliberations. It took them almost a week, and on December 27th, they reported being unable to reach a unanimous decision. Some jurors felt that without a complete DNA profile, they couldn't definitively convict Marvin, leading the judge to declare a mistrial. In early 2024, the prosecution announced plans for a retrial, set to begin on September 30th, 2024. Until then, Marvin will remain in jail. Considering that he is 76 years old now and suffering from multiple health issues, there's a possibility he might not survive until the end of the new trial. If the court fails to convict him again, Marvin could be released, leaving Melissa's murder unresolved, and we may never learn the truth. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.